Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Legal Lunch Byte. I am thrilled today to have Michael Whalen here from the Palio Group, based in Beijing. He's the CEO and founder. He has a deep China experience, and we're going to dive deep into the world of recruiting talent in China. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to be here.
So please give us some background. You were in Beijing, at least you were based in Hong Kong, long before I was even thinking about Hong Kong. So please give us some background about yourself, what you were doing there, and dive right into what recruiting was like back in the 90s in Hong Kong.
Okay. Well, I landed in Hong Kong after studying Mandarin in Taipei for a year. I'd gone to Beijing. It wasn't a good time to be in Beijing, so everyone was fleeing south to Hong Kong. I ended up there and began working with a recruiter there, Boyden International. And believe it or not, Hong Kong was the big market then. China was this small aside that held some promise. But all the regional headquarters and the APAC headquarters were all based in Hong Kong, so that was the big center. And we started looking at China because clients were asking us to go up and do some searches there. And so a lot of the firms were thinking about opening offices in China, but couldn't quite get around to it or make that decision. China was very, very different then. So to start with, recruiting was illegal, okay? You were a disruptor of harmony in society. So
wow.
Yeah, you were pulling nice, very settled and contented people out of a harmonic situation and disrupting society. So we didn't have an office there for the longest time. And eventually other firms began to set up offices, but we'd go up there on day trips to do interviews. So I'd go up to let's say to Beijing or Shanghai or Suzhou. Suzhou was more than a day trip because you had to travel outside of a main city, and it was out into the hinterlands. But very interesting, and the kind of positions were absolutely basic. There was no such thing as a senior manager in China then. And so we'd go up, do multiple interviews for the day, either camp out at a hotel or and continue the next day, or we'd come straight back into Hong Kong. And so yeah, and what I'd like to say is that the work unit idea, everyone belonged to some work unit. Everything was owned by the state. If you wanted to get a job, after university, you went home and basically sat there for as long as 2 years, waiting for a letter to arrive to tell you where you were going to work.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just, and so the people you'd interview had no clue what an interview was about because they'd never interviewed. Assignments meant that you just showed up and reported for work, and there you were part of that work unit or that state corporation. You were basically working. If you had resumes, they were these perfunctory resumes, name, title, date, basically listing, and very basic position. Sales manager, I think, was the first popular position that we would, and of course, for people to show up or even understand or to be willing to get a phone call from someone in Hong Kong, and then attend an interview with a stranger, a foreigner, was pretty wild for them. It was an excursion. So I remember one guy pounding on the table, completely misunderstanding what it was all about, because I told him that he really wasn't suited for the position we had. And he was pounding on the table and leaning over, and all this spittle was coming at me. And he was telling me that he was a member of the Communist Party and that I didn't get it. I had to hire him. I said, I'm not doing the hiring. It's not me. It's not my decision. But I'm organizing this, and I don't think that your background fits what we have. Anyway, many such scenes like that. Lots of misunderstandings, lots of fumbling around. And those people would be interviewing for $100 a month job. The company would pay $1,000. That person would receive 100 because it would dogleg through this bureaucracy wherein the bureaucratic entity would take $900 out of their pay and give them 100. That was the deal then, right? And everybody had to go through this because this whole work assignment thing in the communist world then was that you had a dossier. The dossier contained all of your family, birth records, education, and work information. You're never allowed to see that as an individual, but it must be held bureaucratically. That's a requirement. That must be held by some entity, some legal entity. And so they created these agencies. There were two large ones. And so you had to dogleg through them so that they could hold your dossier. The foreign company could not hold a citizen's dossier. So that was a requirement there.
That's fascinating. So was $100 a month a decent step up in what they were making? Would it have been a big step up?
It would have been a pretty big step up.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, there were lots of folks who weren't making anywhere near that. And by the way, we're talking about university graduates. At that time, I think China was graduating out of a population of 1.2 billion. They were graduating, I think, 3,000 a year.
3,000 university degrees.
Yeah. So
wow.
Kind of a rarity, and the people we were talking to, of course, were university plus 10 years kind of thing, right?
So fascinating. Okay, so let's fast forward because we're almost halfway through our time, which is hard to believe, but we can always talk again. This is
Right.
I've never had a conversation quite like this. Someone who's got that long view on China, what it was like to be an employee in China, pre 2000.
Yeah.
So what has changed now? I mean, that was 30 years ago. What has changed in the interim as China has woken up? I mean, the number of graduates, we still have graduates sitting around waiting for jobs in China to some extent. And so I'm very curious what this looks like now.
Yeah, I cannot fathom why that is an issue, because they're still only graduating less than 20,000, I think, a year, or let's say it's 20,000 in the vast array of industry and commerce in China. That's not too difficult to absorb. So I don't understand that issue. But how has China changed? Wow, how has it not changed? I mean, it's so much has evolved and rapidly, so that I mean, the EV industry didn't exist, the auto industry didn't exist, the aerospace industry didn't exist, medical technology didn't exist in those days. There was e-commerce didn't exist. You just can't imagine what the amount of change has been. And this has had a societal effect as well. But now you have world-class, highly competitive executives at very senior levels. There's a whole population of those people. There aren't enough of them, but there are those who could. I would put in a boardroom or in a C-suite anywhere in the world and say, this guy can compete. He can lead a company and can compete. So that's the difference. And of course, headhunting and executive recruiting is now mainstream. There are millions of tiny firms located all over China. I wouldn't say they're professional, but there are plenty out there. Everyone and his brothers basically hung a shingle out and said, I can do this.
How would you compare those who are considered Chinese homegrown leaders versus those who have spent time abroad, either education or job-wise?
Good question. There used to be a big divide. It used to be a real premium paid for MBAs with Western degrees. I would say that that's completely evaporated now. It's respected. I don't mean to say it's not. But it's come back to, you have to essentially prove something that you're capable. And then people look at the degree. there may be companies who look at the degree and say, all right, that gives us some assurance that you understand the culture, et cetera. You know, you have a Michigan university degree. All right, then that tells us something about your level of understanding and ability to communicate and interact with us. But there are so many. The population I draw on, for instance, is 20-year multinational experienced executives. Where their degrees come from really doesn't matter in the scheme of things. It's their track record. What have they done? Where have they gone? What are their references? What are their achievements?
Great. And so what types of companies are you recruiting for? Companies, positions, sectors?
Okay, well, that's changed a lot too. I used to do the Honeywells, the Siemens, the Boeings of the world, and I don't touch them at all anymore. I'm solely devoted to mid-size B2B manufacturers. So if you make something, generally in a high tech or an advanced tech arena, and you're mid-sized, and I have a very broad definition of that. Let's say 80 million to $1 billion, with divisions that are at the $100, $200 million level. Those are my ideal clients. So I don't do banking, I don't do finance, I don't do big box retail, all of that stuff.
And so what are you seeing in the manufacturing industry? I have some insights into this because I've been doing a fair amount of agreements, but mine tend to be on the purchase side, not on the executive side. So what are you seeing across the board in the manufacturing world in China?
Well, it's really wild.
Let's say post-COVID, COVID, then post-COVID.
Okay, so the first thing I will say is that COVID was a 3-year respite from oversight for many companies and local managers. So what can you imagine they got up to in the way of fraud and corruption without oversight for 3 years? No one could come in and look at anything. I mean, I think this is undiscovered by Western companies. Most don't want to hear about it, but every time you lift the carpet, oh my gosh, there's so much underneath that's been going on since COVID. But let's zoom out a little bit. I probably talk to 10 companies a week, various levels of management. And what I've been hearing for the first part of this year, the most of what I've been hearing is we're down 20%, we're down 30%, 40, 50%. That's the highest number I've heard. Yesterday, I talked to someone who's in the advanced space automated machinery, down 40%, catering to the semiconductor industry, right? But then a couple of weeks ago, I was in Taichung making a presentation to a group, and one member of the group that I was talking to revealed that her company had grown 60% in the last 12 months. Oh, I was a bit taken aback by that. And I thought, wow, it must be a small scale operation. This is a German company, right? They added 200 million euros to the top line in the last 12 months.
Wow.
Laser surface treatment is their main product. So not sold directly, but to other tool makers who incorporate that component into their manufacturing process or their machinery. I talked to an American precision machining metals company. They've added $200 million to their top line, not too far away. This is all in East China, around Shanghai and up the Yangtze River Delta. So there's some pretty wild things going on. There's wild growth taking place here amidst others who are sinking and hanging on. So it's really, and I think the common thread is a technological advantage, some lead in technology that they're able to leverage. It won't last forever, but they're able to really leverage that. So all the doom and gloom you read about is happening. But in addition to that, there are pockets of hyper growth. I don't know what else you'd call 60 to 100%. That's hyper growth, right?
Sure. So parting thoughts, because we are at time. what advice do you have? I know it's hard to believe. What advice do you
Wow.
have for Western companies that are looking at China? What do you think they're missing in terms of this HR, high level HR standpoint?
What I bump into, and I'll try to make this shorter, what I bump into is companies that don't realize the talent level that is available in China. They just don't understand who they could be hiring. And so they're under hiring, if you will. The other thing they don't understand is that the clock in China ticks twice as fast as anywhere else on earth. So there's a lot happening, and there's a lot continuing to happen, and it's all compacted compared to the normal timeframes that they're on. And this seems to me a huge disconnect with the rest of the world. The adoption rate here, the innovation rate. Remember, this is a country that was a joke and labeled a copycat for how many decades? We've gone from that to total innovation and the fear that they're going to take over the automotive world. I mean, back to your question, what's changed?
That's excellent. Well, we'll definitely have to catch up again soon, Michael. It's been so fun to have you on the show, so fun to hear your perspective, and really look forward to catching up with you again soon.
All right, let's do it again. I'll be a little less long-winded. How's that?